On a map of the American heartland, trace a single rail line running westward from the Great Lakes toward the high plains. The date is December 1913. Snow has not yet fallen in earnest, but the sky carries that heavy, waiting quality that farmers and railroad men have learned to read. Holiday trains are running on schedule. Telegraph wires hum with ordinary messages. Coal smoke rises from station chimneys in thin, steady columns. Nothing about this evening suggests what the next 3 days will bring. In the hours ahead, a slow-moving storm will drift across this map, gathering strength as it travels. It will lay down snow so deep that trains will vanish into white drifts. Telegraph lines will bow under the weight of ice until they sag and fall silent. And somewhere along this quiet stretch of countryside, one passenger train will come to a gentle but lasting stop, its wheels held fast by snow that rises nearly to the windows. There it will remain for 3 long nights, its lamps glowing like a row of lanterns in the darkness, while the wind sweeps across the empty fields and the world outside grows still. Tonight, we are going to drift slowly through that storm and that stranded train. This is a calm history for sleep, told without rush and without sharp edges. The details are drawn from the era, from the way trains moved and stopped, from the way communities responded when weather closed the lines. But this is not a story of crisis. It is a story of waiting, of quiet routines, of frost thickening on windows while lamps burn steadily inside. By minute 2, we will be standing on a lamplit platform as the first snow begins to fall, watching passengers board the evening train. By minute 4, we will have taken our seats inside a warm carriage, listening to the rhythm of wheels rolling out into the countryside. By minute 6, the train will have come to a gentle stop in the deepening drifts, and we will settle into the hush that follows when movement finally ends and stillness takes over. Throughout this story, certain images will return again and again. Windows glowing against the dark, lantern light moving through the snow, the contrast between the wind outside and the warmth within. These are the quiet anchors of the nights ahead. They will keep us company as we follow the train through its 3 silent nights, waiting for the storm to ease and the world to open up again. This is a story told for rest. The pace is slow. The tone is gentle. There is no need to follow every word. If your attention drifts, that is perfectly fine. The story will be here, moving steadily forward whenever you return to it. And if sleep finds you before the end, that is the best outcome of all. So take a moment now to settle in. Adjust your blankets if you need to. Let your breathing slow. The station platform is just ahead, its lamps already glowing through the first few flakes of snow. We will step onto it together in just a moment. If you're still settling in, we'll soon step onto the platform and listen as the first snow begins to touch the tracks. The evening is cold but not yet bitter. A Midwestern city spreads out behind the station, its brick buildings fading into the early dark. Street lamps glow at corners. Smoke rises from chimneys in soft, vertical lines that suggest the air is still, the wind not yet awake. On the platform, passengers gather in small clusters, their breath visible in the lamplight, their voices low and unhurried. This is a holiday train, bound westward towards smaller towns and rural junctions where families are waiting. The passengers are a familiar mix for December. Workers heading home after months away. Parents traveling with children wrapped in wool coats. Older couples carrying parcels tied with string. A few solitary travelers with newspapers folded under their arms. Everyone moves with the patient rhythm of people who know that trains run on their own schedule and that hurrying accomplishes little. The locomotive stands at the head of the platform, its black bulk outlined by the glow of the station lamps. Steam drifts from beneath the boiler, curling upward into the cold air before dissolving into the dark. The headlamp is already lit, casting a pale cone of light along the tracks ahead. Behind the engine, the passenger cars wait in a long, quiet row, their windows reflecting the station lights in soft, warm rectangles. A porter stands at the steps of each car, helping passengers up with a steadying hand and a quiet word. Luggage is handed up piece by piece. Leather valises, cloth bags, wooden trunks with brass corners. The sounds of boarding are muffled and familiar. The creak of steps, the soft thud of bags being set down, the murmur of voices asking about seats and schedules. Inside the carriages, the air is warmer, carrying the faint smell of coal from the heating stoves and the deeper, older smell of polished wood and leather seats. Overhead, oil lamps hang in brass fixtures, their flames steady behind glass. The light they cast is golden and soft, pooling on the wooden paneling and glinting off the brass fittings of the luggage racks above. Passengers find their seats and begin the small rituals of settling in. Coats are unbuttoned but not removed, scarves loosened, gloves tucked into pockets. Some passengers arrange their belongings with particular care, placing a book or a packet of food within easy reach. Others lean back immediately, letting their eyes close as the warmth of the car begins to ease the chill from their bones. Through the windows, the platform is still visible, the porter's lantern moving along the length of the train, the last few passengers hurrying toward their cars, the station master standing near the engine with a watch in his hand. Everything has the steady, practiced quality of a routine repeated countless times. Departures like this happen every evening. There is nothing unusual about tonight, except for the snow. It begins as the train is still standing at the platform, so light at first that only the sharpest eyes notice it. Small flakes drift down through the lamplight, appearing and disappearing like sparks in reverse. They do not accumulate. They do not stick. They simply fall, touching the platform and the carriage roofs and the shoulders of the porter before melting into nothing. A few passengers glance upward through the windows, nodding the snow with the casual interest of people who have seen many winters. Some mention it to their seatmates in low voices. Most pay it no attention at all. Snow in December is expected. Snow that falls this lightly is hardly worth remarking upon. Outside, the station master lifts his lantern and signals toward the engine. A moment later, the locomotive responds with a long, low whistle that echoes off the station walls and fades into the evening air. The cars give a gentle shudder as the couplings take up the slack. Then, with a slow, gathering motion, the train begins to move. The platform slides past the windows, first quickly and then more slowly as the train picks up speed. The station lamps fall behind. The brick buildings of the city give way to smaller structures, then to the dark shapes of trees and fences, then to open fields stretching away into the night. Inside the carriages, passengers settle more deeply into their seats. The rhythm of the wheels becomes a steady background pulse, a sound so constant that it soon fades from conscious attention. Lamps sway gently in their brackets, their light shifting almost imperceptibly with the motion of the train. Conversations grow quieter. Some passengers open books or newspapers. Others simply watch the darkness outside, where the snow continues to fall, a little thicker now, visible in the pale glow that spills from the carriage windows. The train is moving well, its speed steady, its course familiar to the crew. The engineer has made this run dozens of times. The conductor walks the aisles with a calm, unhurried step, punching tickets and answering questions about arrival times. Everything is proceeding as expected. But outside, the snow is beginning to change. The flakes are larger now, falling more densely. They no longer melt the moment they touch the ground. Instead, they are starting to accumulate, a thin white layer forming on the fields and the fence posts and the edges of the tracks. The wind, too, is beginning to stir. It is not yet strong, but it is there, a presence that was absent an hour ago. It pushes the snowflakes sideways as they fall, sends small drifts forming along the edges of embankments, and carries a sharper cold through any gap in clothing or window sill. None of this is alarming. Winter storms are part of the rhythm of the season, and this train has passed through snow before. The passengers in their warm seats have no reason to worry. The crew in the engine cab have no reason to change their plans. Everyone expects to reach the first junction on schedule, and then the second, and eventually the final destinations where families are waiting with lamps in the windows. But the snow keeps falling, and the wind keeps rising, and somewhere ahead, the tracks are beginning to disappear under a white blanket that grows deeper with every passing hour. If you're still awake with us, we'll follow the train out into the dark fields, where the snow thickens and the last town lights fall away. The first sign that something has changed comes not from the snow itself, but from the rhythm of the train. For hours, the wheels have turned with a steady, predictable pulse, a sound so constant that passengers have long since stopped hearing it. But now, almost imperceptibly, that rhythm begins to falter. The train slows, then recovers, then slows again. The pauses between accelerations grow longer. The forward motion, once smooth and certain, becomes hesitant, as if the locomotive is feeling its way through something it cannot quite see. Outside the windows, the world has become a study in white and gray. The fields that were visible earlier have vanished. The fence posts that once marked the edges of farms are now buried to their tops, their shapes softened into anonymous mounds. The telegraph poles along the right-of-way stand in crooked lines, their wires heavy with ice, their crossarms bowed under the weight of accumulated snow. Even the tracks ahead are difficult to see, hidden beneath drifts that ripple and shift with each gust of wind. The snow is no longer falling gently. It is driving sideways, pushed by a wind that has grown from a whisper to a steady, insistent force. The flakes are smaller now, harder, more like grains of ice than the soft crystals of earlier hours. They strike the windows with a faint, continuous tapping, a sound that blends with the deeper moan of the wind and the labored breathing of the locomotive. In the engine cab, the crew works with quiet concentration. The fireman feeds coal into the firebox with steady, measured shovelfuls, keeping the steam pressure high. The engineer peers ahead through a windshield that is half covered with frost and driven snow, trying to read the line through the white curtain that has closed around them. He adjusts the throttle, easing back when the wheels begin to slip, pushing forward when the way seems clear. There is no panic in the cab, only the focused attention of men doing difficult work in difficult conditions. The train pushes through the first drift, its cowcatcher throwing up fans of snow that disappear immediately into the wind. It pushes through a second drift, and a third, each one requiring a little more effort than the last. The passengers in the carriages feel these encounters as gentle surges and hesitations, small interruptions in the forward motion that are not quite alarming but are not quite normal either. Some passengers look up from their books. Others press their faces to the cold glass of the windows, trying to see what is happening outside. But there is nothing to see except the snow, swirling and thickening, and the occasional dark shape of a telegraph pole passing slowly by. The world outside has shrunk to a narrow circle around the train, a bubble of lamplight and steam surrounded by an endless, moving whiteness. The conductor moves through the cars with a calm that is carefully maintained. He answers questions about delays with reassuring generalities. He suggests that passengers make themselves comfortable, that the crew is experienced, that winter storms are not unusual, and that the train will proceed when conditions allow. His voice is steady. His manner is untroubled. but those who watch his eyes closely might notice that they flick toward the windows more often than before. The train slows again, more markedly this time. The wheels grind against the rails with a sound that is almost a groan. The locomotive strains forward, its exhaust puffing in rapid, labored bursts. For a long moment, the train seems suspended between motion and stillness, neither moving forward nor falling back, simply holding its place against the pressure of the wind and the weight of the snow. Then, with a final shudder, it stops. The silence that follows is not complete. The wind still moans outside. The heating stove still crackles softly. Passengers still shift in their seats, murmuring to one another in low voices. But the sound of the wheels is gone, and in its absence, the world feels suddenly, strangely still. The engineer climbs down from the cab to inspect the situation. He wades through snow that reaches nearly to his waist, his lantern casting a small, brave circle of light around him. What he sees confirms what he already suspected. The drifts ahead are too deep to push through. The snow has packed against the rails in a solid wall that extends as far as the lantern light can reach. Behind the train, the tracks are already filling in, the path they traveled just minutes ago disappearing under fresh accumulation. The train is stopped between stations in open country, with no immediate shelter and no easy way forward or back. The nearest town is several miles away, invisible behind the curtain of snow. The nearest junction where snowplows might be waiting is even farther. For now, and for however long the storm continues, this is where they will stay. Word passes quietly through the carriages. The conductor moves from car to car, explaining the situation in calm, measured tones. They are stopped, he says, but they are safe. The locomotive has coal enough to keep the heating stoves burning for many hours. The crew is experienced and will keep watch through the night. When the storm eases, help will come. In the meantime, passengers should make themselves as comfortable as possible and try to rest. The news is received with the quiet acceptance of people who understand that weather cannot be argued with. Some passengers sigh. Some exchange worried glances. A few children ask questions that their parents answer with gentle reassurances. But no one panics. No one demands explanations that cannot be given. The train has stopped, and now they will wait. Outside, the wind continues to build the drifts higher. The snow piles against the wheels and the undercarriage, creeping upward toward the windows. The headlamp of the locomotive glows bravely into the whiteness, illuminating nothing but the endless fall of snow. The last sounds of motion fade away, replaced by the softer, steadier sounds of a train at rest. The creak of cooling metal, the whisper of steam, the quiet breathing of passengers settling in for a long night. The first of 3 silent nights has begun. As the wheels grow still and the wind takes over the sound outside, we'll ease into the first of 3 quiet nights on this snowbound train. In the early 20th century, the telegraph is the nervous system of the railroad. It carries messages from station to station, from dispatcher to engineer, from one end of the line to the other. It tells crews when to proceed and when to wait. It reports arrivals and departures, delays and diversions. Without the telegraph, the railroad would be a collection of isolated trains, each moving through its own small world without knowledge of what lies ahead or behind. Tonight, the telegraph is failing. The wires that run alongside the tracks are strung on wooden poles, rising and falling with the contours of the land. In fair weather, they carry their messages reliably, humming faintly in the wind as the electrical signals pass through them. But this is not fair weather. This is a storm that coats every surface with ice, that bends branches and snaps limbs, that turns the ordinary weight of winter into something the infrastructure was never designed to bear. Along the line, the telegraph poles are struggling. Some lean at awkward angles, their bases undermined by the drifting snow. Others have snapped entirely, their upper sections fallen across the drifts, their wires trailing loose across the white ground. The ice that coats the wires adds weight with every passing hour, pulling the lines lower and lower until they sag between the poles like heavy curtains. In the small telegraph offices along the line, operators sit at their keys and wait. They tap out queries into the wire, asking for responses from stations down the line. Sometimes the responses come, faint and broken, words arriving in fragments that are difficult to piece together. Sometimes there is only silence, the kind of silence that means the connection has been lost somewhere between here and there. The station master at a junction town leans over his operator's shoulder, watching the key. The lamp on the desk casts a warm circle of light across the instruments, the message pads, the worn wooden surface of the table. Outside the window, the snow is falling so thickly that the platform across the tracks is barely visible. The station master asks if there has been any word from the trains. The operator shakes his head slowly, his fingers still resting on the key, waiting for a signal that does not come. On the stranded train, the crew does not know the full extent of the silence. They know that they have stopped. They know that help will be needed. But they do not know that the dispatchers are struggling to reach them, that the messages sent from the junction have gone unanswered, that the wire connecting this stretch of track to the wider network has gone dead somewhere in the drifts ahead. The conductor makes his rounds again, reassuring passengers with the same calm voice. He does not mention the telegraph because there is nothing useful to say about it. The passengers do not need to know the details of how railroads communicate. They need only to know that they are safe, that the crew is competent, that the train is warm and the storm will eventually pass. But in the small offices along the line, the operators are beginning to piece together the scope of the problem. The trains that left on schedule have not arrived on schedule. The wires that should be carrying confirmations are carrying only silence. The dispatchers who should be coordinating movements are working with incomplete information, guessing where trains might be, wondering which stretches of track are clear and which are buried. One by one, the stations are becoming islands. The snow that blocks the roads and drifts across the platforms is also blocking the flow of information. Newspapers in the larger cities will carry only the vaguest reports, noting that winter storms have caused delays in the region, that some trains are running late, that travelers should expect disruptions. The specific details, the locations of stranded trains, the conditions in isolated communities, these will not become clear until the storm has passed and the lines are restored. For now, the silence spreads. In the farmhouses scattered across the countryside, families notice that the telephone lines are dead. The few who have telephones pick up the earpiece and hear nothing, or a faint crackling that carries no voices. They hang up and turn back to their stoves, their lamps, their quiet evening routines. The isolation is not alarming. It is simply a fact of the storm. When the weather clears, the connections will be restored. Until then, each house is a small, separate world, lit by its own lamps, warmed by its own fire, waiting out the weather in its own way. On the train, the passengers are settling into a similar isolation. They do not know where they are in any precise sense. They know they left the city, traveled for some hours, and stopped somewhere in the open country. But the names of the nearest towns, the distance to the next station, the exact location of the train on the map, these details are vague to most of them. They are passengers, not crew. Their job is simply to wait. And so they wait. The windows are frosted over now, the outside world invisible except as a gray-white blur. The lamps inside burn steadily, casting their familiar glow across the wooden seats and the polished brass fittings. The heating stoves keep the air warm enough for comfort, though the cold presses in at the edges, at the windows and doors, wherever the seal is imperfect. Time passes differently when there is no motion, no changing scenery, no sense of progress toward a destination. The passengers who checked their watches at departure find themselves checking again and again, surprised by how slowly the minutes seem to move. Some try to read, but find their eyes wandering from the page. Some try to sleep, but find themselves too alert, too aware of the unfamiliar stillness. The conductor passes through again, pausing to answer questions, to offer what reassurance he can. He does not know when they will move again. He does not know what is happening along the line, but he knows that the train is safe, that the crew is keeping watch, that the storm cannot last forever. This is what he tells the passengers, and this is what they choose to believe. Outside, the wind continues to howl. The snow continues to fall, and the telegraph wires, coated with ice and bowed with weight, continue their long silence. If you're still listening, We'll move inside the carriages now, where people begin to settle into a slower, quieter rhythm while the lines outside fall silent. When motion stops, a different kind of activity begins. The passengers who have been sitting passively, watching the world slide past the windows, now find themselves with time to fill and space to arrange. The train that was carrying them toward their destinations has become, for the moment, a temporary home, and they begin to treat it as such. The first adjustments are practical. Coats that were loosened for comfort are now buttoned again or arranged as extra layers against the cold. Scarves are wrapped more snugly. Gloves are retrieved from pockets and pulled on. The heating stoves in each car are working steadily, but they cannot entirely overcome the chill that seeps in through the windows and doors. The passengers adapt as people always do, finding small ways to make themselves warmer. Luggage is rearranged. Valises that were stowed overhead are brought down and opened, their contents searched for food, for books, for anything that might make the waiting easier. Some passengers have packed carefully for just such possibilities. Tins of crackers, wrapped sandwiches, small jars of preserves. Others have brought nothing and must rely on the generosity of their neighbors, who share what they have with the quiet understanding that roles might easily be reversed. In one car, a woman unpacks a small basket and begins to distribute bread and cheese to the passengers around her. She does not ask if they are hungry. She simply offers, and they accept. The food is plain but welcome, and the act of sharing creates a small bond among people who were strangers an hour ago. In another car, a man produces a deck of cards and begins to deal out hands for a quiet game. He does not announce the rules. He simply plays, and others join in, grateful for something to occupy their hands and minds. The game proceeds in near silence, punctuated only by the soft slap of cards on the seat between players and the occasional murmured word. Children who have been restless with the long sitting are now given permission to move about the car. They walk carefully up and down the aisle, touching the brass fittings, pressing their faces to the frosted windows, inventing small games that require no equipment and little space. Their parents watch them with patient eyes, grateful that the children are occupied, that the energy that might have become complaint is instead becoming play. The windows themselves have become objects of fascination. The frost that coats them is not uniform. It forms in patterns, delicate ferns and feathers and spirals, each window different from the next. Some passengers spend long minutes simply looking at these patterns, tracing their shapes with a fingertip, watching the places where breath has cleared small circles in the frost, revealing glimpses of the white world outside. The lamps overhead continue to burn, their light steady and warm. In their glow, the wooden paneling of the cars takes on a deeper color. The brass fittings gleam softly, and the faces of the passengers are lit with a gentle, flattering light. The atmosphere is not one of crisis. It is something closer to the quiet of a household in the evening, when work is done and there is nothing left to do but wait for sleep. Some passengers pull out letters and begin to write, balancing paper on books or on the flat surfaces of their valises. They write to family, to friends, to business associates, describing the delay in calm terms, noting the snow, the stillness, the unexpected pause in their journey. They do not know when these letters will be sent. They write them anyway because the act of writing is comforting, because it connects them to the people they are traveling toward. Others pull out books and read or try to read. The light is good enough and the quiet is conducive to concentration, but many find their attention wandering. They read the same paragraph twice, 3 times before realizing they have absorbed nothing. They set the books aside and simply sit, watching the lamp flames flicker, listening to the sounds of the train at rest. Those sounds are surprisingly rich. The wind outside provides a constant backdrop, a low moan that rises and falls with the gusts. The heating stoves crackle and pop as the coal burns down. The metal of the car creaks and groans as it cools and contracts. Occasionally, there is the sound of footsteps as the conductor passes through, or the muffled voice of a child asking a question, or the rustle of fabric as someone shifts position in their seat. As the hours pass, a rhythm begins to emerge. Passengers eat when they are hungry. They talk quietly with their neighbors. They rest when they can, leaning against the hard backs of the seats, pulling coats and blankets over themselves, closing their eyes even if true sleep does not come. The rhythm is not the rhythm of travel. It is the rhythm of waiting, of passing time, of enduring with patience what cannot be changed. The conductor continues his rounds, checking on passengers, answering questions, maintaining the calm that keeps the situation manageable. He knows that the night will be long and that the passengers will grow weary, but he also knows that weariness is not danger. The train is warm. The coal is sufficient. The crew is keeping watch. These are the things that matter. Outside, the storm continues. The snow piles higher against the windows. The wind shakes the cars with occasional gusts. But inside, the lamps burn on, and the passengers settle deeper into their makeshift routines, finding comfort in the small rituals of warmth and food and company. If your eyes are getting heavy, we'll simply stay here for a while, inside the warm glow of the carriages, listening as the wind brushes softly along the frosted windows. The train has been stopped for some hours now, its lamps visible across the white fields as small, steady points of light. In the darkness and the driving snow, those lamps are noticed. They are noticed by the railroad workers who live in section houses along the line, whose job it is to maintain the track and who know this stretch of country better than anyone. They are noticed by farm families whose houses sit within sight of the rails, who have watched trains pass their windows for years and who know tonight that something is different. The first to respond are the section men. They emerge from their small houses with lanterns in hand, wrapping themselves in heavy coats and scarves, pulling on boots that will need to wade through waist-deep snow. They do not wait for instructions. They know what a stopped train in a blizzard means. They know that passengers will need warmth and food, and perhaps shelter if the night grows too cold. The journey from the section house to the train is not long in distance, but it is difficult in execution. The snow is deep and still falling. The wind cuts through clothing with a sharpness that takes the breath away. The lanterns cast small circles of light that barely penetrate the swirling white. The men move slowly, testing each step, pushing through drifts that collapse behind them almost as quickly as they are made. When they reach the train, they call out to the crew, making themselves known. The engineer emerges from the cab, snow crusting his coat and hat, his face reddened by the cold. There is a brief exchange of information. How long the train has been stopped, how many passengers are aboard, what supplies are available. Then the work of assistance begins. The section men begin to dig a path from the train to the nearest section house. It is hard work, the snow heavy and the wind constantly filling in what has been cleared. But they work steadily, trading off the labor when arms grow tired, making slow progress through the drifts. The path they create is narrow, barely wide enough for one person to pass at a time, but it is a connection, a link between the isolated train and a place where there is warmth and shelter. At the section house, the wife of the section foreman has been preparing. She stokes the stove until it glows with heat. She puts on pots of water for coffee and tea. She brings out whatever food is in the larder: bread, preserved vegetables, salt pork, a few jars of pickles and preserves. It is not much, but it is offered freely, without calculation of what might be repaid. Some passengers make the journey along the narrow path, those who are most in need of a change of scene or a warmer place to rest. They include families with young children, elderly travelers who are finding the hard seats of the train difficult to endure, and a few individuals who simply need to move, to walk, to feel something other than the stillness of the stalled carriages. The section house is small, but it absorbs them. People sit where they can, on chairs, on benches, on the floor near the stove. They wrap their hands around mugs of hot liquid and feel the warmth spread through their bodies. They talk quietly among themselves, strangers drawn together by circumstance, sharing stories of where they were going, what they were hopping to find at their destinations, how they had not expected to spend the night like this. Meanwhile, nearby farm families are responding as well. They see the lights of the train, and they see the lanterns of the section men moving through the snow, and they understand that help is needed. Some bring food, loaves of bread, pots of stew, jars of milk. Others offer space in their homes, beds and couches and floor space where travelers can rest more comfortably than in the train cars. The journey between farm and train is made by sled where possible, by foot where necessary. The farmers know the terrain, know where the drifts are deepest and where the snow lies more lightly. They bring their lanterns and their practical knowledge and their unhesitating generosity, and they make the train a little less isolated, a little more connected to the community that surrounds it. On the train itself, the mood shifts slightly. The arrival of the section men, the news that shelter is available nearby, the sight of lanterns moving through the snow, all of these things remind the passengers that they are not alone. The world beyond the frosted windows is not empty. There are people out there, people who have noticed, people who are helping. The conductor organizes a rotation, ensuring that those who want to visit the section house can do so while others remain on the train. He coordinates with the section foreman to manage the flow of people and supplies. The work is quiet and efficient, the kind of cooperation that emerges naturally when everyone understands what needs to be done. As the night deepens, the paths between train and houses become more established, packed down by the passage of many feet. Lanterns are placed at intervals along the routes, small beacons that guide travelers through the darkness. The snow continues to fall, but the paths are maintained, kept open by repeated clearing, and by the steady traffic of people moving back and forth. In the farmhouses and the section house, the passengers find not just warmth but welcome. They are offered seats by fires, plates of simple food, conversation that passes the time. The farm families ask about the cities the passengers have come from, about the destinations they were traveling toward. The passengers ask about life on the prairie, about the rhythms of farming, about what it is like to live where the sky is so wide and the winters so deep. These conversations are not profound. They are the ordinary exchanges of people meeting by chance and making the best of an unusual situation. But they create connections, however temporary, and they remind everyone involved that community extends beyond familiar faces, beyond known neighbors, to anyone who shares the same weather, the same difficulties, the same need for warmth in the cold. If you're still with this story, we'll follow those lanterns back and forth between train and farm, as strangers become neighbors in the middle of the storm. While the passengers wait and the farm families offer shelter, another kind of work is happening along the line. This is the work of the railroad itself, the slow, methodical effort to understand the scope of the problem and begin the process of restoration. It is work that happens mostly out of sight, in engine yards and dispatcher offices, in telegraph stations and maintenance depots, wherever there are people whose job it is to keep the trains moving. At the nearest junction, the superintendent of this division of the line has been awake for many hours. He stands at a wall map in his office, studying the routes, noting the places where trains have reported and the places where no reports have come. The missing train is marked with a small flag, its last known position uncertain, its current status unknown. He cannot reach it by wire. He cannot send crews to it directly, not until the storm eases enough to allow movement. But he can prepare. In the engine yard, the snowplow locomotives are being readied. These are not ordinary engines. They are fitted with massive wedge-shaped plows at their fronts, designed to push through drifts and clear the rails. Some of them carry rotary plows, spinning blades that can cut through packed snow and throw it aside in great white arcs. They are impressive machines, but they are also slow, and they require clear track behind them to operate. In a storm this severe, even the plows must wait. The crews who will operate the plows are gathered in the roundhouse, warming themselves by the stoves, checking their equipment, discussing the conditions. They are experienced men who have cleared lines in many winters, who know the techniques and the dangers, who understand that this work cannot be rushed. They drink coffee and eat sandwiches and wait for the word that conditions have improved enough to begin. Along the line, the section men are not only helping passengers but also assessing damage. They walk the track where they can, knotting places where the rails are buried, where the drifts are deepest, where the telegraph poles have fallen. They cannot fix these problems now, but they can report them, building a picture of what will need to be done when the storm passes. The linemen, the workers whose job it is to maintain the telegraph wires, are also preparing. They know that lines are down across the region. They know that restoration will be a long process, requiring them to wade through deep snow, climb poles that may be unstable, splice wires that have been coated with ice for days. They gather their tools, their climbing spikes, their heavy gloves, and they wait for conditions that will allow them to work. In the small towns along the line, other essential workers are doing what they can. The local doctors check on patients who cannot travel, making house calls on foot or by horse-drawn sled when the roads are passable. They carry their bags through the snow, visiting the elderly, the ill, the families with young children, ensuring that no one is in immediate distress. The telegraph operators, where lines still function, work to maintain whatever connections they can. They relay messages when possible, receive reports from stations that can still transmit, and piece together an understanding of the situation across the region. Their work is painstaking, each message tapped out letter by letter, each response awaited with patience. At the stranded train, the crew maintains its own routines. The engineer and fireman take turns monitoring the locomotive, keeping enough fire in the firebox to maintain heat in the cars, conserving coal against the possibility of a long wait. The conductor continues his rounds, checking on passengers, coordinating with the section men, keeping track of who has gone to the nearby shelters and who remains on the train. The brakemen walk the length of the train periodically, checking the couplings, the brakes, the connections between cars. They clear snow from the platforms between carriages, from the steps that passengers use, from any place where accumulation might cause a problem. Their work is unglamorous but essential, the kind of maintenance that keeps small problems from becoming large ones. There is a rhythm to all of this activity, a steady pulse of preparation and maintenance that continues through the night even as the storm rages outside. It is not dramatic work. There are no moments of crisis or heroism. There is simply the methodical effort of people doing their jobs, keeping systems functioning, preparing for the moment when real progress becomes possible. The passengers on the train see only glimpses of this work. The section men who appear with lanterns, the conductor who passes through with updates, the occasional distant sound of activity from the locomotive. They do not know about the superintendents and dispatchers, the plow crews and linemen, the doctors and operators who are all playing their parts in the larger response. They only know that help is being organized, that people are working, that the railroad has not abandoned them. This knowledge is enough. It provides a kind of comfort that goes beyond the physical warmth of the stoves or the shelter of the nearby farmhouses. It is the comfort of knowing that systems are in place, that people are doing their jobs, that the machinery of civilization has not broken down just because the trains have stopped. As crews outside prepare their slow, steady work, we'll return for a moment to the smaller, quieter scenes aboard the train itself. In the third car from the rear, a group of children has gathered near the heating stove. They range in age from perhaps 5 to perhaps 12, and they have formed the kind of temporary alliance that children create when circumstances bring them together. Their parents sit nearby, watching with tired but attentive eyes, grateful that the children have found ways to occupy themselves. The youngest child, a boy with a wool cap pulled low over his ears, is drawing on the frosted window with his finger. He traces shapes in the condensation. A house, a tree, what might be a dog or might be a horse. The shapes last only a moment before the frost creeps back across them, erasing his work, inviting him to begin again. He does not seem frustrated by this. He simply draws another house, another tree, another uncertain animal, content with the process rather than the result. An older girl, perhaps 10 or 11, has taken on the role of organizer. She has invented a game that involves counting things. How many lamps are lit in the car? How many buttons on the conductor's coat? How many window panes on each side of the aisle? The other children participate with varying levels of interest, some counting carefully, others losing track and starting over, all of them engaged in something that passes the time. The parents of these children do not know each other. They boarded at different stations, are traveling to different destinations, have nothing obvious in common except the circumstance of this delay. But they have formed their own quiet alliance, trading off the work of supervision, sharing crackers and dried fruit, exchanging the knowing looks of adults who understand the difficulty of keeping children calm during a long wait. In another car, an elderly man sits alone by a window, wrapped in a heavy coat with a blanket over his knees. His face is lined and weathered, the face of someone who has spent many years outdoors, perhaps farming, perhaps working the rails himself in younger days. He watches the other passengers with patient eyes, occasionally nodding when someone passes or meets his gaze. A young woman, traveling alone, has taken the seat next to him. At first they sat in silence, strangers with no reason to speak. But gradually, as the hours passed, they began to talk. The old man speaks of winters he remembers, storms that came when he was young, the ways that weather shaped life on the prairie before the trains, before the telegraph, before any of the systems that now seem so essential. His stories are not dramatic. They are simple accounts of ordinary difficulties. A time when the family was snowed in for a week. A time when cattle had to be dug out of drifts. A time when the only way to reach town was by sled over fields that had become one unbroken sheet of white. He tells these stories without complaint, without nostalgia, simply as facts of a life lived in a place where winter was always a serious matter. The young woman listens with genuine interest. She is from a city, has never experienced weather like this, has never thought much about what it meant to live in a place where snow could stop everything for days. The old man's stories give her a context for what is happening now, a reminder that people have always endured such things, have always found ways to manage, have always come through to the other side. In the baggage car, which is not heated but is somewhat sheltered from the wind, a railway dog keeps watch. This is a large, shaggy animal of uncertain breed, the kind of dog that railroads keep for companionship and sometimes for practical purposes. Tonight his practical purpose is simply to be present, a warm, breathing creature in a cold, still space. The baggage handlers check on him periodically, bringing water that they have warmed by the stove, offering scraps of food from their own provisions. The dog accepts these offerings with quiet dignity, his tail thumping against the wooden floor of the car. He does not seem distressed by the situation. He has spent other nights in baggage cars, other nights when trains were stopped and the world outside was harsh. He settles onto a pile of mail bags and closes his eyes. At a nearby farm, the animals are also being tended. The farmer makes trips to his barn through snow that reaches past his thighs, carrying feed for the cattle, checking on the horses, ensuring that the chickens have not been buried in drifts that have piled against the coop. His lantern swings in the wind as he walks, casting moving shadows across the white ground. In the barn, the animals are calm. They have warmth from each other, water that the farmer keeps from freezing, hay and grain that he has stored against the winter. The storm outside is a sound they hear, but do not respond to. They stand in their stalls or settle onto the straw, breathing their warm breath into the cold air, waiting as they always wait for the farmer to come and the morning to arrive. These small scenes, the children at their games, the old man with his stories, the dog in the baggage car, the cattle in the barn, they are not the main story of the blizzard. They are the background, the texture, the life that continues even when trains are stopped and lines are down. They are reminders that the storm is not the whole world, that within the cold and the wind there are warm places, small comforts, moments of connection and care. If you're still listening, we'll let these small, steady moments of care and company carry us deeper into the second night. Beyond the stranded train, beyond the farmhouses and section houses, the small towns along the line are experiencing their own version of the storm. These are communities that depend on the railroad for many things, for mail, for newspapers, for supplies that cannot be produced locally, for the connection to the larger world that the trains represent. Tonight, that connection has been severed, and the towns are adjusting. In the general store of one such town, the proprietor stands behind his counter and surveys his shelves. He has been in business for many years and has learned to keep more stock on hand during winter than during other seasons. But this storm has lasted longer than expected, and his supplies are beginning to thin. The flour is running low. The coffee is nearly gone. The lamp oil that customers depend on for light is down to the last few cans. He does not panic. He simply begins to ration, setting aside portions for customers he knows will need them most. The elderly widow who lives alone, the family with 6 children, the boarding house that feeds a dozen workers. When other customers come in, he explains quietly that supplies are limited, that he is doing his best to ensure everyone gets something, that the trains will come again when the storm passes. The customers accept this with understanding. They are people who have lived through other winters, other shortages, other times when the rhythm of life was interrupted by weather. They take what is offered, pay what they owe, and return to their homes to wait. At the post office, the postmaster faces a different kind of accumulation. The mail that should have gone out on the evening train is still sitting in sacks on the platform, buried now under several feet of snow. The mail that should have come in from the cities has not arrived at all. His pigeonholes, which should be emptying as people collect their letters, are instead filling up with outgoing mail that has nowhere to go. He spends his hours sorting what he can, organizing the waiting mail into neat piles, preparing for the moment when the lines reopen and the backlog can be cleared. It is work that accomplishes nothing immediate, but it occupies his hands and his mind, and it ensures that when the trains finally run, the mail will be ready to move. The people who come to the post office window ask about their expected letters, about packages that were supposed to arrive, about news from family members in distant cities. The postmaster can only tell them what he knows, that the trains are stopped, that the wires are down, that information is scarce, that patience is required. He tells them this gently, without irritation, understanding that their questions come from concern rather than complaint. In the newspaper office, the editor faces his own challenge. He publishes a weekly paper that is due to come out in 2 days, but he has no fresh news from beyond the town, no telegraph reports, no wire stories to fill his columns. He must make do with local news, with observations about the storm itself, with practical information about which roads are passable and which businesses are open. He writes a front-page story about the blizzard, describing its severity, noting the stranded trains, praising the efforts of the section men and the farmers who have offered shelter. He has no specific information about the train that is stopped a few miles outside town, but he mentions it in general terms, hoping that the passengers are safe, trusting that the railroad will care for them. The paper, when it is finally printed and distributed, will become a document of this storm, a record that people will keep and sometimes reread in later years. It will remind them of what the weather was like, of how the community responded, of the small kindnesses and steady efforts that got everyone through. In the livery stable, the horses stand in their stalls, restless from lack of exercise but otherwise content. The stable owner has decided not to rent out any teams until the weather clears. The risk of a horse going lame in a hidden drift, or a sled overturning on an unseen obstacle, is too great. Instead, he keeps the animals fed and watered and warm, waiting for conditions to improve. A few determined souls do venture out, on skis or snowshoes or simply on foot, to check on neighbors, to deliver essential supplies, to satisfy the need to move that the storm has otherwise thwarted. They return with reports of drifts that reach to the eaves of houses, of roads that have vanished entirely, of a landscape transformed into something almost unrecognizable. These reports are shared in the general store, in the post office lobby, in the newspaper office, wherever people gather to escape the cold and pass the time. They become the currency of the storm, the stories that people will tell and retell, the shared experience that binds the community together. And through it all, the town waits. The mail waits. The supplies wait. The news waits. Everything is suspended, held in place by the snow and the wind, waiting for the moment when the world will begin to move again. If your mind is drifting, we'll gently bring it back to the train, where lamps burn through a second long night while the towns around it wait just as quietly. The second night is deeper than the first. The passengers who were restless earlier have now settled into a kind of acceptance, a recognition that the situation will not change quickly, and that the best response is patience. The train has become a small, enclosed world lit by lamps, warmed by stoves, surrounded by snow that rises almost to the windows. The crew has established a watch rotation. Every few hours, someone walks the length of the train, checking on passengers, inspecting the heating stoves, ensuring that nothing has gone wrong in the night. These rounds are made quietly, with a lantern held low, with footsteps that try not to disturb the sleepers. They are acts of vigilance, small reassurances that someone is awake and watching even when the passengers themselves are not. The conductor takes the first watch of the night. He moves through the cars with practiced ease, nodding the sleeping passengers, the ones who are still awake and reading, the families huddled together under shared blankets. He checks the stoves, adding coal where needed, adjusting the dampers to maintain steady heat. He pauses at each door to look out into the darkness, seeing nothing but snow and the faint reflection of his own lantern. Outside, the section men have been busy. They have cleared paths not just to the nearby houses but between the cars themselves, narrow tunnels through the drifts that allow crew members to move along the length of the train without having to climb over the snow. These tunnels are reinforced with packed snow walls, lit at intervals by lanterns hung from poles or set into niches carved in the white surface. The effect is strange and beautiful. The train, half buried in drifts, is now connected by a network of glowing passageways, each one just wide enough for a single person to pass. The lanterns cast warm pools of light against the snow walls, making the tunnels seem almost comfortable, almost like the corridors of a house. Steam rises from the locomotive, visible in the lantern light as a thin white mist that drifts across the scene before vanishing into the darkness above. The passengers who are still awake sometimes press their faces to the windows to watch these movements outside. They see the lanterns bobbing along the tunnels, the shapes of crew members and section men moving between train and houses, the occasional flash of light when a door is opened and then closed again. It is a reassuring sight, evidence that activity continues even in the deep of night, that they have not been forgotten or abandoned. Inside the cars, the sounds of night are soft and layered. There is the constant backdrop of the wind, now risen again to a low moan that never quite ceases. There is the crackle of the stoves, the occasional pop of cooling metal, the creak of the car's frame as it settles under the weight of the snow. And there are the human sounds, the steady breathing of sleepers, the occasional cough or sigh, the whispered conversation of those who cannot quite drift off. A mother sits awake with a fussy infant, rocking gently, humming a tune so soft it is almost inaudible. An elderly man stares at the ceiling of the car, his thoughts elsewhere, perhaps in the past, perhaps in the destination he is trying to reach. A young couple sits with heads together, speaking in voices too low to be overheard, finding comfort in each other's presence. The conductor completes his rounds and returns to the vestibule at the end of the car, where he can sit for a moment and rest his feet. He will be relieved in a few hours by the brakeman, who will make the same rounds, check the same stoves, Observe the same passengers. It is repetitive work, but it is necessary, and it provides a structure to the long night. In the section house, a similar rhythm is unfolding. The section foreman takes turns with his wife, one sleeping while the other tends the stove and watches over the passengers who have taken shelter there. Coffee is kept warm on the back of the stove, available for anyone who wakes and wants it. The fire is fed with fresh wood at regular intervals, keeping the small house warm despite the cold that presses against the walls. The paths between train and houses are walked periodically, not because there is anything specific to do, but because the walking itself is a form of vigilance, a way of ensuring that the connections remain open, that the tunnels have not collapsed under fresh snow, that the lanterns have not burned out. The section men take turns at this duty, each one spending an hour or so outside before returning to warm up by the stove. The night passes slowly, measured not by clocks but by the rhythms of these rounds and watches. The storm continues, sometimes easing slightly, sometimes gusting with renewed force, but never quite stopping. The snow continues to fall, adding layers to the drifts, deepening the burial of the train and the tracks. And yet within this slow passage of hours there is a kind of peace. The passengers who can sleep are sleeping. The crew who are watching are watching. The systems that have been put in place are functioning. The train is not moving, but it is safe. The people are not comfortable, but they are cared for. And somewhere above the clouds, invisible but certain, the stars are turning toward morning. If you're still awake in this quiet, we'll move forward to the moments when the storm begins slowly to relax its hold. As the second night deepens into the third day, the passengers and crew become more attuned to the subtle dangers that accompany a prolonged storm. These are not dramatic perils, not the kind that announce themselves with sudden noise or obvious threat. They are quiet hazards, the kind that develop slowly, that require attention and care to manage, that can be avoided entirely with the right precautions. The first concern is ventilation. The heating stoves in each car burn coal continuously, producing not only warmth but also combustion gases that must be allowed to escape. The stovepipes that carry these gases upward are designed to vent through the roof, but the accumulating snow has begun to block them. If the vents become completely covered, the gases will have nowhere to go, and the air inside the cars will become dangerous to breathe. The crew addresses this with regular attention. Every few hours, someone climbs onto the roof of each car, carefully making their way across the snow-covered surface, and clears the area around the stovepipe. It is cold work, exposed work, the wind cutting through clothing despite the layers. But it is necessary, and the crew performs it without complaint, understanding that the comfort and safety of the passengers depends on these small, repeated efforts. The passengers themselves are asked to help in smaller ways. They are encouraged to crack the windows occasionally, just a small gap, enough to allow fresh air to circulate even as the cold seeps in. This trade-off between warmth and air quality is managed carefully. The windows are opened for a few minutes at a time, then closed again, the balance maintained through the collective attention of everyone aboard. The snow itself presents hazards beyond simple obstruction. The weight of it, accumulating on the roof of each car, adds stress to structures that were not designed to bear such loads indefinitely. The crew watches for signs of strain, the creak of wood under pressure, the slight sagging of ceiling panels, the appearance of cracks in the paint or varnish. None of these signs have appeared yet, but the watching continues because early detection of a problem is always better than late discovery. Outside the train, the paths that have been carved through the drifts require constant maintenance. The snow that falls each hour fills in what was cleared the hour before. The walls of the tunnels can shift and collapse if not reinforced. The lanterns that light the way can be buried or extinguished by gusts of wind. The section men work in shifts, keeping the paths open, replacing lanterns as needed, shoring up walls that have begun to lean. The cold itself is a hazard that requires respect. The temperature has dropped steadily since the storm began, and now hovers at a level that can cause harm to exposed skin within minutes. The passengers are advised to keep their extremities covered, to wear gloves and hats even inside the cars, to avoid touching metal surfaces that conduct the cold directly to the flesh. Children are watched especially carefully, their tendency to remove gloves and scarves corrected gently but firmly by attentive parents. For those who must venture outside, the precautions are more elaborate. Multiple layers of clothing are essential. Faces must be covered with scarves or cloth. Movements must be deliberate and unhurried, because sweating in such cold can be as dangerous as shivering. The section men and crew who walk the paths between train and houses have developed routines that minimize their exposure. Short trips rather than long ones, frequent returns to warmth, careful attention to any numbness in fingers or toes. The water supply presents another challenge. The tanks that normally provide water to the train's basins and facilities are at risk of freezing. The crew works to keep them from becoming solid ice, periodically draining small amounts, wrapping the pipes in whatever insulation can be improvised, running water through the system even when it is not needed simply to keep it moving. These efforts are partially successful. Some pipes freeze anyway, and the passengers must make do with water melted from snow, heated over the stoves in pots and kettles brought from the farmhouses. There is a strange comfort in this focused attention to practical problems. The passengers who might otherwise dwell on their predicament find themselves drawn into the small tasks of maintaining their temporary home. They take turns watching the stoves, reporting any concerns to the conductor. They help clear snow from the vestibule steps, or hold lanterns for the crew who climb to the roof. The activity gives them purpose, and purpose helps the hours pass. The crew, meanwhile, maintains its steady vigilance. The engineer and fireman continue their watch over the locomotive, keeping the fire banked just enough to maintain heat, conserving the coal that will be needed if the storm continues much longer. The conductor makes his rounds with the regularity of a clock, noting any changes, addressing any concerns, providing the reassurance of his calm presence. By the afternoon of the third day, the hazards have been managed, the precautions have held, and no serious problems have developed. The train is still stopped, still buried, still waiting for conditions to improve. But it is also still safe, still warm enough, still providing shelter from a storm that shows the first faint signs of beginning to ease. Reset. As long as the stoves stay tended and the paths stay open, we can simply listen to the last hours of the storm passing over the silent cars. The change begins so gradually that at first no one notices it. The wind, which has been a constant presence for nearly 3 days, begins to lose its edge. It still blows, still sends snow swirling past the windows, but it no longer howls with the same insistence. The gusts that once shook the cars now barely cause them to tremble. The moan that once filled every silence now fades to a whisper, then to something even softer. Inside the train, passengers look up from their books, their card games, their quiet conversations. Something has changed. They cannot immediately identify what it is. The lamps still burn. The stoves still crackle. The frost still covers the windows. But there is a difference in the quality of the air, in the feel of the moment, in the unspoken sense that the worst has passed. One of the crew members opens a door at the end of a car and steps out into the vestibule. The cold that greets him is still sharp, but it is no longer brutal. The snow is still falling, but the flakes are larger now, drifting down almost lazily rather than driving sideways. The visibility, which has been measured in feet for days, has begun to extend. He can see the outlines of the telegraph poles again, dark shapes against the gray sky. He returns to the car and reports what he has observed. The word spreads quietly from seat to seat, from car to car. The storm is easing. The wind is dropping. The snow is slowing. These are not guarantees that movement will resume soon, but they are signs, hopeful signs, and the passengers receive them with quiet relief. The interval that follows is strangely peaceful. The urgency of the storm has passed, but the work of recovery has not yet begun. The train sits in its cradle of snow, still and silent, waiting for whatever comes next. The passengers who have been waiting for 3 days find that they can wait a little longer now. The tension that has underlain their patience begins to dissolve, replaced by a softer, more restful kind of stillness. Some passengers take the opportunity to sleep more deeply than they have since the journey began. The bundles of coats and blankets that have served as beds become more comfortable somehow, the hard seats less noticeable. The sounds of sleep fill the cars, the steady breathing of the exhausted, the soft murmur of dreams, the occasional gentle snore. Others use the quiet to write or read or simply think. The letters they have been composing gain new paragraphs, new reflections on the experience they have shared. The books they have been trying to read finally capture their attention. The thoughts they have been avoiding now find space to surface, examined in the gentle light of the easing storm. The children, sensing the change in the adults around them, grow quieter as well. Their games become slower, less energetic. They settle near parents or near the warmth of the stoves, content to rest, content to wait. The older ones understand that something has shifted. The younger ones simply respond to the atmosphere, absorbing the calm that now fills the cars. Outside, the snow continues to fall, but it is a different kind of snowfall now. It is the tail end of the storm, the last exhausted efforts of a weather system that has spent its strength. The flakes are large and wet, sticking to surfaces where before they were driven past. The accumulation slows, then nearly stops, then resumes briefly before stopping again. The light begins to change as well. Behind the clouds, invisible but present, the sun is higher than it has been in days. The gray of the sky takes on a brighter quality, a hint of the brilliance that waits behind the overcast. The shadows inside the cars shift slightly, the angle of the filtered light telling of afternoon moving toward evening. In the farmhouses and section houses, the helpers who have been caring for passengers notice the change as well. They stand at windows and watch the sky, reading the weather with the practiced eyes of people who live close to the land. They see what the passengers cannot see, the way the clouds are beginning to thin, the way the wind is now coming from a different direction, the small signs that point toward clearing. Evening comes, and with it a decision to rest one more night before attempting any movement. The storm may have eased, but the snow is still deep, the tracks still buried, the plows still somewhere down the line. Tomorrow will be the time for action. Tonight is for rest, for recovery, for the quiet interval between the storm's fury and the work of restoration. The train settles into this final night of waiting. The lamps burn steadily. The stoves crackle softly. The passengers drift toward sleep with something approaching contentment. The worst is over. The waiting is nearly done. Tomorrow, everything will begin to move again. If sleep is near, you can drift with this hush, as we wait for the first careful steps back out into the snow. The morning of the fourth day arrives with a quality of light that has been absent since the storm began. It is not sunlight, not yet. The clouds still cover the sky in a thin gray sheet, but behind that sheet, the sun is present, and its presence transforms everything. The snow that covers the fields, the train, the buried tracks, All of it glows with a soft, diffused brightness that fills the eyes after days of dimness. The passengers wake slowly, stirred by the change in light more than by any sound. They blink at the windows, which are still frosted but now glow with that pale, promising brightness. They push aside their blankets and coats, stretch limbs that have been cramped for days, and begin the small rituals of mourning, rubbing sleep from eyes, smoothing disheveled hair, reaching for the water that has been warming by the stoves. The conductor makes his morning round with a different energy than before. His steps are quicker, his voice more animated. He stops at each cluster of passengers to share what he has learned. The storm has passed, the skis are clearing, the plows are on their way. It may be hours yet before the train can move, but movement is coming. The waiting is nearly over. One by one, passengers make their way to the vestibule doors to look outside. What they see stops them in their tracks. The snow has risen nearly to the level of the windows. The train, which seemed large and substantial when they boarded, now appears as a half-buried thing, only its upper portions visible above the white surface. The world beyond is transformed beyond recognition, a landscape of rounded shapes and gentle curves where once there were fences and roads and fields. The first to step outside are the crew members, testing the conditions, determining what is safe. They emerge from the doors onto platforms of packed snow that the section men have maintained through the night. From there, they look out across a world that seems both familiar and utterly strange. The telegraph poles are visible again, their tops rising above the drifts. The farmhouses in the distance show smoke rising from their chimneys. The sky above is beginning to break, patches of blue appearing between the thinning clouds. The cold is still sharp, but it is a different kind of cold now. It is the cold of a clear winter day, steady and predictable, rather than the brutal, wind-driven cold of the storm. It is cold that can be managed with proper clothing, cold that allows work to be done, cold that will not prevent the restoration of movement. Gradually, passengers are invited to step outside as well, those who wish to, those who have been cooped up in the cars for too long and need to feel something other than the wooden walls and hard seats. They emerge carefully, guided by the crew, supported by the narrow paths that wind through the drifts. They stand on the packed snow and look around them with something like wonder. Children are lifted up to see over the drifts, their eyes wide at the sight of so much snow, more snow than they have ever seen, more snow than they could have imagined. They reach out to touch the white walls of the tunnels, to scoop handfuls of the powdery surface, to feel the cold prick of it against their cheeks. For them, the experience is not hardship but adventure, a story they will tell for the rest of their lives. The adults are more subdued, but they too feel something of the wonder. They have endured 3 nights in a stranded train, have waded through a storm that seemed endless, have doubted at times whether they would ever move again. And now here they stand in the bright silence of a winter morning, surrounded by snow but no longer trapped by it. The relief is palpable, mixed with exhaustion and gratitude, and something that might be awe. The section men point out the landmarks that are visible now that the storm has cleared. The farmhouse where many passengers took shelter is there, its windows reflecting the morning light. The section house is there, smoke rising from its chimney. The track, still buried but now marked by the line of telegraph poles, stretches away toward the distant junction where help is being prepared. The passengers do not stay outside long. The cold begins to bite and there is still waiting to be done. But the brief excursion has changed something. They have seen with their own eyes that the world still exists beyond the train, that the storm has ended, that the snow is simply snow and not an eternal prison. They return to the cars with lighter hearts, ready for the final hours of waiting. Reset if you're still with us. We'll now watch as paths are patiently carved through this new landscape, linking train, farms, and distant towns again. The work of restoration begins in earnest now. Along the line, in the engine yards and maintenance depots, the snowplows that have been waiting are finally dispatched. They move slowly, methodically, pushing great walls of white before them, throwing fans of snow high into the air, cutting narrow channels through drifts that stand taller than the locomotives themselves. The passengers on the stranded train cannot see this progress directly. The junction where the plows are starting is many miles away, and the work will take hours to reach them. But word comes through the telegraph, which has been restored in fits and starts throughout the morning. The lines are coming back to life, the operators tapping out messages that travel from station to station, each one bringing news of the wider world. The first message that reaches the train is simple: plows dispatched, estimated arrival late afternoon. It is enough. The conductor shares the news with the passengers, who receive it with quiet satisfaction. They have waited this long. They can wait a few hours more. In the meantime, the section men continue their work on the ground. They widen the paths that connect the train to the nearby houses. They clear the vestibule steps more thoroughly, removing the snow that has accumulated even during the night. They begin the long process of digging out the wheels and the undercarriage, removing the packed ice that has formed around the moving parts. Some passengers join in this work, those who are young and strong and eager to do something after days of sitting. They are given shovels and assigned to sections of the train, working alongside the section men, falling into the rhythm of dig and lift and throw. The work is hard, but it is satisfying in a way that waiting never was. Every shovelful of snow removed brings the moment of departure a little closer. The farmhouses that have provided shelter are now providing hot food as well. The farm wives have been cooking since before dawn, preparing pots of stew and loaves of bread, pots of coffee and jugs of milk. This food is carried to the train along the widened paths, distributed to the passengers who have remained aboard, shared among the workers who are clearing the line. The meals are simple but warming, eaten standing up or sitting on the vestibule steps, accompanied by conversation that is lighter than it has been in days. People talk about what they will do when they reach their destinations, about the holidays they have missed and might still partially recover, about the stories they will tell when they finally arrive home. By mid-afternoon, the sound of the plows becomes audible in the distance. It is a low, rhythmic rumbling, accompanied by the occasional whistle of a locomotive. The passengers press to the windows to watch, and soon they see it. A massive engine pushing a wedge-shaped plow, throwing snow in great arcs on either side, cutting a path through the white wilderness toward them. The plow arrives with a final flourish, its blade pushing aside the last drift that separates it from the stranded train. The crews exchange greetings, share information about conditions, coordinate the final steps of the rescue. The engineer of the stranded train inspects his locomotive, confirming that it is ready to move, that the coal is sufficient, that the wheels are free. The telegraph lines are humming now with messages in both directions. The superintendent at the junction receives word that the train is ready. He sends back confirmation that the line ahead is clear, that traffic is being held, that the stranded passengers can finally resume their journey. The conductor walks through the cars one last time, announcing that departure is imminent. Passengers gather their belongings, check under seats for forgotten items, help each other with luggage and children. There is an energy in the cars that has been absent for days, a sense of motion returning after too long a stillness. The section men and farm families who have helped through the ordeal gather alongside the track to watch the departure. Some wave, some simply stand and observe, all of them part of the story now, connected to these strangers who passed through their stretch of country during a remarkable storm. The whistle sounds, long and clear. The wheels begin to turn. The train moves forward, slowly at first, then with gathering speed, leaving behind the place where it has rested for 3 long nights. As the rail line gradually reappears from under the snow, we'll turn to the smaller wonders left behind by the storm. As the train begins to move again, the passengers look out their windows at a world transformed. The landscape they passed through 3 days ago, familiar in its winter browns and grays, has become something else entirely. It is a world of white, of rounded shapes, of strange and beautiful formations that the storm has sculpted from the ordinary materials of fields and fences and trees. The drifts that bury the fences rise and fall in long, sinuous curves, like frozen waves on a still sea. Where the wind met an obstacle, a fence post or a tree or the corner of a building, it has carved intricate patterns, scalloped edges that catch the afternoon light and cast small shadows. The effect is of a landscape decorated by an artist of unusual skill and patience. The telegraph poles that line the track are transformed as well. Ice coats their crossarms and wires, catching the light and glinting with subtle colors: pale blue, faint pink, the ghost of yellow. The wires themselves sag under the weight of the ice, hanging in long, graceful curves between the poles. Some have broken and dangle loosely, but even these have a strange beauty, their ends frayed into silver threads that shimmer in the wind. The trees that stand along the right-of-way are bent and bowed, their branches heavy with snow. Some have lost limbs, the broken ends pale against the darker bark. Others have been transformed into shapes that barely resemble trees at all, great white mounds from which only a few dark branches protrude, or slender columns wrapped so thickly in ice that they seem made of glass. The children on the train press their faces to the windows, pointing out the wonders they see. They spot shapes in the drifts that remind them of animals or people or fantastic creatures. They count the icicles that hang from the eaves of buildings, the longest ones receiving special attention. They watch the patterns of light and shadow that play across the snow as the train moves past. The adults, too, find themselves captivated by the beauty of the aftermath. They have been tired and anxious and uncomfortable for days, focused on the practical concerns of warmth and food and waiting. But now, as the train carries them through this transformed landscape, they allow themselves to simply look, to appreciate, to wonder. The farms they pass show signs of the storm's passage and the work of recovery. Paths have been shoveled from houses to barns, narrow trenches in the white expanse. Smoke rises from chimneys, suggesting warmth and activity within. Occasionally, a figure is visible, a farmer checking on livestock or a child playing in the snow. These glimpses of life are reassuring, evidence that the world has continued even through the storm. The small towns the train passes through are busy with their own recovery. The main streets have been partially cleared, the snow pushed into high banks along the sides. Storefronts are open, their signs visible again, their windows reflecting the afternoon light. People move along the cleared sidewalks, bundled in coats and scarves, going about the business of daily life. At each station, there are small crowds gathered to watch the train pass. Some are waiting to board, their tickets purchased days ago for journeys now finally possible. Others have simply come to see, to witness the first train through since the storm began. They wave as the cars pass, and some of the passengers wave back, connected for a moment by the shared experience of the weather. The light changes as the afternoon progresses. The clouds that have covered the sky for days continue to thin, and in places the sun breaks through, casting bright shafts of light across the snow. These moments of direct sunlight are almost painful to eyes accustomed to the gray dimness of the storm, but they are also beautiful, turning the white landscape into a field of diamonds. As evening approaches, the light turns golden, then orange, then a deep, warm pink. The snow catches these colors and reflects them back, so that the world seems suffused with warmth even as the temperature continues to drop. The passengers watch the sunset through windows that are finally clear of frost, witness to a display that seems designed as a reward for their patience. The train continues its journey, making up time where it can, stopping at stations to discharge and receive passengers. The mood aboard has changed entirely from the mood of the storm. There is conversation and laughter, the sharing of stories, the exchange of addresses and promises to write. The experience has created connections among strangers that might last or might fade, but that exist, for now, as something real and meaningful. If you're drifting toward sleep, you can just rest with these small, shining details the storm has left behind. Before the train reaches its final destinations, before the passengers disperse to their separate homes and separate lives, there is time for one more shared experience. At a junction town where the train must wait for signals, the local community has prepared a welcome. Tables have been set up in the station waiting room, covered with cloths and laden with food, and the passengers are invited to step off the train and share a meal. This is not organized charity. It is simply what people do in small towns when something unusual has happened, when neighbors and strangers alike have been through an experience that calls for acknowledgement. The tables hold dishes that the townspeople have prepared, pots of soup kept warm on improvised stoves, plates of sandwiches, trays of cookies and cakes, urns of coffee and tea. The passengers file off the train and into the waiting room, their eyes widening at the sight. They have eaten what they could over the past 3 days, shared their provisions, accepted the generosity of the farm families who took them in. But this is something different, a deliberate gesture of welcome, a celebration of survival. They fill their plates and find places to sit, on the benches along the walls, on chairs brought from nearby offices, on the edges of tables themselves. They eat with the appetite of people who have been through an ordeal and have come out the other side. The food tastes better than any food has tasted in days, not because it is exceptional, but because it is offered freely, with warmth, in the company of others who understand. The townspeople mingle among the passengers, asking questions about the experience, sharing their own stories of the storm. They talk about the snow that drifted above their windows, the roofs that groaned under the weight, the long hours without news from the outside world. They talk about the efforts to clear the streets, to check on neighbors, to keep the essential services running. These conversations create connections that cross the usual boundaries of class and geography. The businessman from the city finds himself talking with a farmer who has never traveled more than 50 miles from home. The mother with 3 children discovers she has much in common with the older woman who raised 6. The young man traveling alone is adopted for the meal by a family who insists he sit with them. The meal lasts longer than it needs to, longer than the schedule strictly allows. But the conductor, who has been through the same ordeal as the passengers, does not hurry anyone. He understands that this moment is important, that it is part of the story, that it deserves its time. When the passengers finally return to the train, they carry with them not just full stomachs, but also something less tangible. They have been reminded that they are part of a larger community, that strangers can become friends in the course of a shared experience, that generosity exists in the world and does not always need to be repaid directly. Some of the passengers exchange addresses with people they have met, promising to write, to stay in touch, to visit if their travels ever bring them back this way. Most of these promises will not be kept. Life will resume its normal patterns, and the extraordinary connections of the storm will fade into memory. But a few will endure, letters exchanged over years, visits made, friendships maintained against the odds. The train pulls away from the junction, its whistle sounding a farewell to the townspeople who wave from the platform. The passengers settle into their seats, some already dozing, others gazing out the windows at the passing landscape. The mood is peaceful, content, the kind of calm that follows a storm in more than one sense. The journey continues through the evening and into the night. The passengers who are close to their destinations prepare to disembark, gathering belongings, saying goodbyes to seatmates they may never see again. The passengers who have farther to go settle in for another night of travel, this time with motion, with progress, with the reassurance that they will arrive. If your breathing has slowed, we'll let these shared meals and gentle conversations carry us toward the moment when the line begins to move again. In the days following the storm, the region slowly returns to normal. The railroads run extra trains to clear the backlog of passengers and freight. The post offices work extended hours to sort and deliver the mail that accumulated during the delay. The newspapers print long accounts of the storm, its severity, its impact, and the stories of those who lived through it. The stranded train becomes a minor legend. The passengers who were aboard tell their stories to family and friends, who tell them to others, until the tale spreads far beyond the people who actually experienced it. The details change in the telling, as details always do, but the essence remains. A train stopped by snow, passengers waiting through 3 long nights, help arriving from unexpected quarters. The railroad company reviews its procedures in light of the storm. They examine the placement of section houses, the routes of the telegraph lines, the protocols for dispatching plows. Some changes are made, small improvements that will make future storms slightly easier to manage. The system learns from the experience, as systems do. The farm families and section workers who helped during the storm return to their normal routines, but they carry the experience with them. They speak of it occasionally, when weather threatens or when newcomers arrive who have not heard the story. They remember the passengers they sheltered, the meals they shared, the nights when their small houses became refuges for strangers. For the passengers themselves, the return to normal is both welcome and strange. They arrive at their destinations, greet the families and friends who have been waiting anxiously for news, settle back into the patterns of daily life. But something has changed. They have seen how quickly the ordinary can become extraordinary, how a routine journey can become an adventure, how the systems they take for granted can fail, and how people can step in to fill the gap. Some passengers become more careful in their preparations for travel. They pack extra food, extra clothing, extra supplies just in case. They pay more attention to weather forecasts, altering their plans when storms threaten. They have learned in a visceral way that the world is not as predictable as it seems, that contingency plans are worth having. Others carry different lessons. They remember the kindness of strangers, the generosity of people who had no obligation to help. They try to carry this memory into their own lives, to be the kind of person who offers aid when it is needed, who opens their door to those in difficulty. The storm has shown them something about human nature, and they want to live up to what they have seen. The railroad, for its part, makes certain that the crew who managed the stranded train are recognized for their efforts. The conductor, the engineer, the fireman, the brakeman, all receive commendations from the company. The section men and their families receive letters of thanks. These formal acknowledgments are small, but they matter. They say that what happened was noticed, that the effort and dedication were valued. In the small towns along the line, the storm becomes part of local history. It is marked by the telling of stories at gatherings, by references in local newspapers on anniversaries, by the occasional monument or plaque that commemorates what happened. The storm becomes a shared memory, a point of reference, a way of saying we were here and we got through it together. The telegraph lines that failed during the storm are repaired and, in some cases, reinforced. The poles are strengthened, the wires given more slack to accommodate the weight of ice. The system is made more resilient, not immune to future storms, but better able to withstand them. Technology adapts, as technology always does. And the passengers who were on that train, who shared those 3 nights of waiting, who ate together and told stories together and stepped out into the transformed landscape together, they carry something with them for the rest of their lives. It is not dramatic, not life-changing in any obvious way. It is simply a memory, a story, an experience that they had. But it is theirs, and it connects them, however tenuously, to everyone else who was there. As rails hum softly again, and doors open more easily, we'll gently look back over what these 3 silent nights have taught us. And so we come to the end of this story, this quiet account of a train stopped by snow and the people who waited within it. 3 nights passed, measured not in drama but in patience, not in crisis but in care. The storm that seemed endless eventually ended. The tracks that seemed impassable were eventually cleared. The journey that seemed stalled forever eventually resumed. What remains when the story is over? Perhaps a sense of how thin the margin is between the ordinary and the extraordinary. A routine train journey, the kind that happens hundreds of times each winter, became something memorable simply because the weather refused to cooperate. The passengers who boarded expecting an uneventful trip found themselves part of a small community, bound together by circumstances they could not control. Perhaps a sense of gratitude for the systems that usually work. We take for granted the trains that run on time, the telegraph lines that carry our messages, the roads that stay clear enough for travel. When these systems fail, we are reminded of how much we depend on them, and how much we depend on the people who maintain them. The section men and linemen and crews who do their work invisibly until the moment their work becomes visible. Perhaps a sense of connection to the past. This storm happened more than a century ago, in a world without automobiles or airplanes or telephones as we know them. Yet the human elements of the story are timeless. The need for warmth, the fear of isolation, the comfort of company, the relief of rescue. We recognize these feelings because we share them. We are connected to those passengers across the years by the simple fact of our common humanity. The images that linger are quiet ones: lamps glowing in windows, lanterns moving through the snow, frost feathering across glass, the hush that falls when the wind finally stops. These are the images of a world at rest, a world waiting, a world suspended between one state and another. The train has reached its destination now. The passengers have dispersed. The story has ended. But somewhere in the archives of history, in the memories of descendants, in the landscape itself, traces remain. The farmhouses still stand, or their successors do. The railroad still runs, or its successor does. The storms still come, as they always have and always will. And perhaps on a quiet winter night, when the snow is falling and the wind is rising, and the world feels suspended between what was and what will be, we can imagine ourselves there, on that train in that storm, waiting with patience for the morning we know will eventually come. This has been a calm history for sleep, told for those who seek rest and find comfort in slow stories quietly told. If it has helped you drift toward sleep, then it has served its purpose. If you are still awake, perhaps the next story will carry you further into rest. Thank you for listening. May your rest be deep and your dreams be gentle. Good night. If you're still awake at this point, you can let the story go now, and simply breathe with the fading sound of wind and distant rails.